Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Donovan, let me start with you. The hospital at Fort Leonard Wood in my home state of Missouri is continuing to suffer from staffing shortages. We've been assured that these shortages will be filled this coming summer, but I'd like to hear this from you directly. Can you assure me and the people of my state that the hospital at Fort Leonard Wood will have the staffing it needs on the timeline that has been promised?
Well, Senator, I certainly can promise that if confirmed, I will make sure that that all staffing across the entire DoD has been problematic, and part of it is sometimes the civilian hiring processes take too long, and we end up losing good prospects to private industry as well too. So we're working to reduce the time to hire and all that. The Army, I understand, has been working diligently to make the pay levels comparable as well too, in order to attract those people. So.
Very good, thank you. I'll hold you to that and look forward, I hope, to working with you on it. Mr. Mercator, let me come to you. Let's talk a little bit about the European Deterrence Initiative. You wrote in your advanced policy questions that initiative, EDI, has, I'm quoting you now, contributed greatly to correcting posture problems in Europe. Can you just say a word about how that's been the case in your view, why that's been the case?
One of the things that sticks out to me, Senator, is the pre-positioning of certain equipment that we need for that theater. So looking at the success in bringing that to fruition to adjust our posture in Europe, I think that was definitely a positive in EDI.
You've also written that the United States needs to focus similarly on improving its posture in the Indo-Pacific, which I completely agree with. And let me just ask you this. If EDI has been so successful in Europe, why not try something like that in Indo-PACOM?
Yes, sir, and I'm mindful I owe you a follow-up on my response to you on the letter you sent to Secretary Esper. So we are doing a complete review of our Pacific posture and taking into consideration lessons learned from EDI. There are some differences without NATO in the Pacific, but we have treaty allies. We have territories. It is a maritime theater. Like I said, I think there are advantages, and we need to look at it and take those lessons learned, and I'll work with my colleagues. I owe the Secretary a recommendation. I owe you follow-up on the letter I sent you on that review, and it is ongoing right now because following the plans review in the Pacific, equally important is to make sure we have the right posture to compete and also to follow on our contingency plans.
Just thinking for a second back to the European example, I've heard it argued by some that a Pacific deterrence initiative, if you like, may actually discourage allied investment. But that's not what we've seen in Europe, is it? I mean, with EDI, what we've seen is that our dedicated funding commitments there has actually spurred allied commitments. I mean, it's actually helped improve our position across the board. Isn't that fair to say?
Sure. As I've traveled and engaged with partners and allies, I think it is a positive development with our allies.
Yeah, and I don't see any reason why it would be any different in Indo-PACOM. Mr. Mercator, let me ask you about the role of deterrence by denial in the national defense strategy. Can you speak about that, the role of deterrence by denial?
I think deterrence, when you look at the elements of deterrence, you need capability, will, and to be able to communicate it. I think, first of all, we have to do that. Deterrence by denial, as I see, is the next step, whether you have to take some aggressive action to deny an adversary an advantage. So I would go through the first tenets of deterrence to make sure that they understand we have the will and the capability, and there are consequences if they try to test us.
Do you think our force west of the dateline is currently enough to deter China?
I think that the force west of the dateline is there to allow us to compete. And there is friction between the ability to compete and the ability, which I think there is a deterrence value there, but we have to be agile enough to adjust if we need to prevail in a conflict.
Still thinking about the national defense strategy, what metrics, in your view, should Congress use to evaluate the department's progress in implementing NDS?
We just, Senator, we just signed out our assessment. We use actually 3 things: validity, to make sure that it is still valid, and we believe that it is; how we are implementing it, and there has been challenges as we reset the force for great power competition. The Middle East contingency is one. We may not be on the timing that we need to do to reset our force. And then we look at effectiveness. If we're competing, how are we competing, and what is China or Russia's view on that competition, and all the other aspects? Are we making the investments in developing the concepts, capabilities, plans that support our ability to compete and prevail? So those are the three metrics that we look at, and I've held state of the strategy meetings both external to the department and within the department to try to get a valid assessment, and if confirmed, I will continue to do so, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.